This is the screencast for Lesson 20 of Stephen's C# 24-Hour Trainer. The focus of this lesson is on writing methods so you can reuse code. For this try it, we're going to write a method for this program to use. What this program does is it takes these values that the user enters and then it finds the minimum, maximum, and average of those values. Now I've built a small program here with the user interface and a little bit of code to get us started, and then we'll add the method. So in the calculate button, I've got code here to load the values that the user entered into an array. It starts by calling the text box, gets its text, and calls split to break those values apart so that it's an array. That creates an array of strings, and I really want an array of doubles, so then I create an array of doubles called values, and I loop through the array of strings, parsing each one, saving them into the values array. Down here we do our calculation. I haven't written that code yet. And then we display the results. Now I decided to call the result variable smallest, largest, and average, so let's declare those now. Smallest, largest, average. And now we need to invoke our function, or our method. So I'm just going to create one here. I'm just going to make up a name for it. I'm going to call it find minimum, maximum, average, and then pass it parameters. Well, the first parameter is going to be our values array. That's easy. The next three parameters are our three output parameters, smallest, largest, and average. We need this method to modify their values for us, so when we return we can see what they are. So we need to pass them by reference, and we have two choices. We can use the ref keyword or we can use the out keyword. If we use the ref keyword, then we have to initialize the values before we call the method. If we use the out keyword, then it's assumed that the method does not use the input values when they come in. It only returns them when they go back out. Now in this case, this find minimum, maximum, average method doesn't need any input values except what's in this array, the values array. That's how it calculates its results. So we don't need to pass anything into the array. So to make the code a little simpler and easier to read, we'll use the out keyword instead of ref. So we'll type out smallest, out largest, out average. So there's our method call. Now we get a red squiggly underline here because find minimum, maximum, average doesn't exist yet. That's normal because we haven't written it. You could write it yourself, and that's fine, but Visual Studio provides this nice little tool. If you right click on it and select generate method stub, what it does is it analyzes this call and figures out what the method has to look like. So in this case it knows that it has to take a double array as its first parameter. It's got an out double called smallest as its second parameter, another out double called largest, and an out double called average. It simply used these same names, smallest, largest, average, and values, for its parameter names. You could change them if you want, but there's really no need to, and having them the same makes it slightly less confusing. So now we just need to fix this routine up. It created it as a void. That's fine. We don't return anything except through these output variables. Initially it puts in this statement, throw new not implemented exception. So if you run the code and invoke this method, it throws an exception so you can find out where the problem is. So we'll just get rid of that and add our own code. Of course, when I get rid of that, we get a red squiggly underline because we have not assigned values for our output variables. And it wants us to do that before we exit this routine. So now let's add our code. To find the minimum and maximum, we're going to set some variables equal to some small value and large value, and then modify them as we loop through the array. So let's declare those variables. I'll call them minimum, and I'm going to set it equal to the first value in the array. I know that the minimum is at least as small as that value. Similarly, I'm going to set the maximum equal to the first value in the array. Now, to calculate the average, we need to add up all the values in the array and then divide by the number of values. So let's create a total variable. And there are a couple of approaches you can take here. You could set total equal to 0 if you want to loop through the entire array. Or in this case, I think for variety, I'm just going to set it equal to values of 0. And have already considered that first item in the array, so we don't need to consider it again. So now let's do our loop. I'll say for I equals 1, int I equals 1, because I want to skip that first value. I've already considered it. I less than values.length. We want to go up to the very end of the array, and remember the array starts with index 0, so its last index is its length minus 1. So we want to go up until I is length. So basically we want to keep going until I, as long as I is less than the length, I++. Inside the array we need to update these values. So I want to look at the new value that I'm considering and see if it's smaller than the minimum, bigger than the maximum, and then we add it to the total. So I'm going to say if values of I is less than minimum, then that means the minimum is too big, so I'm going to update it. Minimum equals values of I. Similarly, if values of I is bigger than the maximum, then the maximum is too small, so we need to update it. So maximum equals values of I. And then finally, total plus equals values of I. When we get out of the for loop, minimum holds the smallest value in the array, maximum holds the biggest, and total holds the sum of them all. So now we can calculate our outputs. Smallest equals minimum, largest equals maximum, and average equals total divided by the number of items, which is simply values.length. Notice now that the squiggly underscore went away because Visual Studio knows we've assigned values to our output variables. So let's run the program and see what we get. If I click calculate, it says minimum is 8. If you look through the list, you'll see that's true. Maximum is 37. That's also true. Average is 20.43. I'm going to have to assume that's true because I'm too lazy to do the math. But if I put in a couple of values here like 10 and 30 and do a calculation, we get an average of 20, which I know is correct. If I add another 10 and another 30, the average should not change. That's still 20. Let's try just for 10 and 100. We get an average of 55, which is also correct. So it looks like the program is working. Now there's one other tweak I want to show you here. This value, minimum and maximum, those two values, they go through the array and they look for the smallest and largest elements in the array. At the end, we set smallest equal minimum, largest equal maximum. That's all fine. It works really well, and it's very self-documenting, so it's pretty easy to understand. But you don't really need those two variables if you don't want them. So what you could do is, instead of using this variable minimum, just set smallest equal to values of 0. And then, of course, we've got these other minimums in here that we need to get rid of. So make that smallest, smallest. And then we don't even need this statement anymore because by the time the loop is finished, smallest already has the smallest value in the array. So we can get rid of that completely. Similarly, we can do largest here. And if we're going to do that, we need to get rid of it here and here. And we don't need that statement. So the code is a little bit shorter. You'll have to decide whether you think it's easier to read or not. In any case, you definitely should go with whatever you find easiest to understand.